My next guest is joining us tonight to talk about rents. Rents not only in Massachusetts, but rents across the country. I spoke this afternoon with David Rauch. He is the founder and CEO of Protect.com. They maintain some 400 condominium communities across the country, but he spent part of his time as a callow youth at Boston University. David, welcome to Nightside. How are you?
I'm good, Dan. Thank you very much for the intro there.
Yeah, well, you're as far as we're concerned, you're a Boston guy, you know.
Well, I remember it very, very well, as I mentioned to you.
Yeah, once a terrier, always a terrier, that's for sure. So
Yep.
Explain what your company does. You have a degree in city planning, and you basically are in the business of not only, I guess, building big condominium developments, but also helping companies maintain them. Break it down for us so we have a sense of what your expertise is.
Yeah, well, actually, we do not build condominium communities. We maintain about 1,000 of them in Southern California and Las Vegas.
Okay.
But we also help developers throughout the country by writing their maintenance manuals that they give to their board of directors of their new communities. So it shows the board how to maintain those communities. So we have a pretty good feel for the pulse of what's being built throughout the country.
So where do we stand at this point? You know, we're starting off sort of with the micro view of, you told me at one point when you were at BU, you rented near the old, Boston University football field right off of Commonwealth Avenue. And so I don't know what the rents were that you paid back in the day, but it's more than a few years ago. I'm sure that they have quadrupled what they're
that
paying.
was back in 1972, so
Yeah.
I'm not sure I can remember that far back, but the rents certainly weren't what they are now.
Yeah.
And rents are a big problem, as we discussed. And, one of the cities that we talked about, Boston, is, the rents are very high there. It's the 7th highest in the country. Massachusetts has the 5th highest rents, and they're going up, and they're going to continue to go up as long as inflation goes up, because they're going to continue raising interest rates.
Well, this article that I have in front of me suggests that the median rent in the U.S. is $2,000 a month. Now, there's a lot of people in Boston who would love to be paying $2,000 a month, but it's the median across the country. So I'm sure that there are parts of the country where the average rent is well below $2,000, but there's a lot of parts of the country where the average rent is way above $2,000, and people just can't afford it. There's an article that I have that says some 3.8 million renters are likely to face eviction in the next couple of months, which is obviously now September and October. Are you seeing statistics like that as well? Are you sensing that?
Well, I've read that article, and I've heard the things, and yeah, there's plenty of places in the country where rents are much cheaper, but you got to understand all their costs are less too.
Sure.
But when we're talking about evictions and renters, don't forget that between 2000 and 2018, there were about 3.7 million evictions per year, 70 million total.
Really?
So
that stuns me. Wow, that's a huge number. Yeah, okay, that's interesting. Put it in perspective.
3.5 million a year. Okay, and remember, there's about 65 million families that rent. So that's 5%. But remember, when the federal government put in the moratorium on evictions, and states had their own moratoriums, all of those evictions were stopped, were told.
Yep.
And that happened for 20 and 21, 2 years in a row. So when the moratoriums were lifted last year, that opened the floodgates to a lot of landlords and a lot of renters that had to, readjust the system. They needed to, clear house.
So here's my question. Every landlord who I have ever known have said to me, this is in Boston, it's a nightmare to evict someone. It takes months and months and months and months with all of the court proceedings. And obviously, if you've got to the point where you're trying to evict a tenant, the relationship is not one that that improves over time. I mean, it gets very nasty. What is wrong with the rental market in America then, since you have the view from 30,000 feet? Why is it that in America we're seeing that many people evicted every year? What's going on from your perspective? You run or you provide information and help run all of these huge developments in different parts of the country. Are people getting in over their heads? What's the cause?
Well, there's the macro situation is that builders, apartment builders and home builders aren't building enough housing, period. And there's a very good reason they're not doing that. And I call it basically the triple crown of self-inflicted wounds. It's overregulation, and then the federal spending, $5 trillion in the last 2-3 years, which has caused interest rates to go up, and then government messing with the free market system. But basically, it's overregulation. Let me give you a great example. California. Sure. Mm-hmm. California's housing. In San Jose, California, you have to make $330,000 a year to be able to afford an average home. The rent in San Francisco, if you can find anything, is like $10,000 a month. It's just amazing. But here's the problem. If you drive along any freeway in San Francisco, L.A., San Diego, L.A. and San Francisco are the worst, San Jose, you'll see all these blue tents after tents after tents. Those are homeless people, and I'm talking hundreds of thousands of people that are homeless because primarily overregulation of the home builders and apartment builders. And they can't, it's practically impossible with all the regulations to build a new community, a new development in California. They've got what you call CEQA, C-E-Q-A, California Environmental Quality Act, and you have a similar legislation in Massachusetts. It's called MEPA. But basically what that is anybody can stop that housing development and bring a lawsuit under CEQA to stop it for environmental reasons, and it takes years to resolve it.
Sure.
And it's somewhat complicated. But that's basically what's happening is the macro view is overregulation is harming builders and apartment builders, home builders.
Well, we've all read stories, and I mentioned to you today that you'll find out that you cannot build in this area because somehow there's a community of snail darters or some insect that we have never heard of. I remember many years ago when you were here in Boston. You might have heard of the Blue Hills. It's a little small area, baby ski area in Milton, Massachusetts. And they were trying to do some building up there, but they found out that there was some sort of a rattlesnake den. And the existence of the rattlesnake den stopped, now this is 30 years ago, stopped the construction of this commercial property cold for rattlesnakes. Mm-hmm. Now... if that was 30 years ago, I assume it's only gotten worse over time.
Oh, it's gotten much worse. And we're not the only country with this problem. I mean, other countries have it too, where they stop projects because of archaeological issues. Mm-hmm. But the problem here, it's really a very serious problem. It's not just California that has CEQA. Other states, 15 other states, as I mentioned, your state has MEPA, are starting to do the same thing. They're just slowing down builders, and it's supply and demand. If you don't build enough homes or apartments, the cost of that home and apartment is going to go through the roof, and that's what's happening here in California.
So when you say MEPA, I assume that's the Massachusetts Environmental Protection Agency.
That's exactly right.
Okay.
MEPA.
So we have a time where you have tens of thousands of people who are homeless in this country right now. We do not have hundreds of thousands. Okay, hundreds of thousands. Thank you for that correction. At the same time, we have opened up the border, the southern border, to allow hundreds of more thousands people to come into the country. We have a situation where there are jobs that are not being filled. We're told that there are anywhere from 6 to 11 million jobs that are unfilled. The unemployment rate is very low. When we get back, we're going to try to figure this out. You and I are going to figure out whatever the solution would be. But it comes down to, the individual couple or the small family or one person who now are finding their rents going through the roof. The chances of them purchasing a property don't exist. I mean, as you said, in San Diego, I don't know how many, or rather in San Jose, how many people in Boston make $350,000 a year. I suspect it's a very small number of people who make that. And let's try to work through it, and let's hear from some of the listeners. If you're having trouble paying your rent at this point, what are you doing about it? Feel free to join the conversation. And if you're a landlord and you want to, but there are a lot of folks out there who are quote unquote landlords, but they have a 3-decker. Maybe they live in one floor and they're renting two floors out. I mean, the landlord honorific seems to be a little overstated. But we'll continue our conversation with Randy Rauch of Protect.com. His company oversees and helps keep in line, I don't know how many tens of thousands of condominiums around the country. He understands what's going on. He says that we're not building enough new homes in this country or properties or condominiums or rental properties to accommodate our population and our population growth, both legal and illegal. My guest is David Rauch. He is a longtime a businessman, and his business is to help many of these large condominium associations. He maintains them. His company maintains them, and tremendous responsibility. Knows the real estate market across the country, but particularly in California. California, things often start in California, and they seem to come back east. I'm worried that the problems of California and their housing shortages and all of that and everything is going to come back here. Let me ask you this question. It sounds to me as if folks who are concerned about climate change, as they should be, and concerned about the environment, as they should be, have thrown up a lot of roadblocks in front of the home building community. And they have a very effective lobby. The people who are affected, besides the home builders, it seems to me, are the people who can't find a place to live, or reasonable place to live, and they're the homeless people who are in tents in America's streets and beside highways in California. They don't have a political lobby. Is that part of the problem?
I think that could be part of the problem. I just don't think that most people in California put 2 and 2 together and realize what the cause of the homelessness is. Obviously, a lot of people are on the streets for different reasons, but mainly it's because they don't have that layer of low-cost housing. There's so many immigrants that coming from all over the world into our country. Many of them end up in California, and they take these low-end apartments, they take homes that are available through churches and so on and so forth, and that displaces a lot of people. And in California, that's what I'm trying to do, is to throw up the red flag here and say, look, you do not want to happen in your state what is happening in California. It's frightening, and if you were to actually drive the freeways through Los Angeles or San Francisco or San Jose, you'll see it. It's right there in front of you. Homeless tent after homeless tent, tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands.
I know
and,
that
it's.
Go ahead,
I'm
David.
sorry.
I interrupted you. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
It's basically from overregulation, and and it's not just CEQA, California Environmental Quality Act. There's other things causing The problem, obviously, inflation, that has caused landlords to raise rents. At the high end of the market, the other end, the expensive end of the rental market, people have left cities in droves by the tens of thousands, and they're now seeking rentals in smaller cities, and that's causing rents to go up there too. So both sides, the low end, the low-cost rentals are not available because of the 2 million immigrants and other reasons, and the high end, the pandemic has caused a lot of dislocation.
This sounds like a perfect storm. I did a story a couple of weeks ago. I believe that in Los Angeles, the city council was considering, and now they're going to put it on the referendum, on the ballot, I believe, next March, which would require hotels to inform the city of Los Angeles every day by 2 o'clock in the afternoon how many empty rooms they have for the next day. And Los Angeles apparently is going to try to fill those hotel rooms with homeless residents.
Yeah, and what do the hotel owners say about that?
Oh, they're not happy about it. I'm sure have you seen that story? I mean,
oh yeah,
yeah. I mean, it just sounds
ridiculous.
Government regulation compounded now by government intrusion.
Yeah, well, I have a news flash for you. Governor Newsom today signed a bill that said that if you're a fast food restaurant franchisor in California, you're going to be soon paying $22 an hour to your workers.
So the price of burgers and fries are going to be going through the roof as well. David, I want to get to...
You know what's going to happen? Rather, it's even worse than that. They're going to have it so that, they're going to have just robots and just a very few number of people in these fast food restaurants.
Yeah,
they can't afford people.
Yeah, no, that's exactly what will happen. I mean, businesses will adapt, but...
Yep.
My guest is David Rauch. He spent some time in Boston back in the 1970s and certainly knows the real estate market across the country. And we're talking about rents, sky-high rents. David, I got almost full lines. I'd like to just get to phone calls if that's okay with you.
Absolutely.
All right, we'll see what people have to say. Let me go first to some of these towns you're going to remember, David. It's going to be fun. Johnny in Melrose. Okay. Johnny, you're first this hour on Nightside with David Rauch. Go right ahead, John.
How's it going?
We're doing great. What's your question or comment?
There's no question, really. I told your producer, whoever answered, I've been homeless for 3 years. This is going to be my fourth winter.
Wow.
I'm not, as the other people said before earlier today, I couldn't call then. I'm not a junkie or anything. I got evicted because of mass health. They put a hold on my bank account because they thought I owed them money for a procedure, which I didn't. That set me behind in rent. I actually made an agreement to pay the rent, and I had it paid by the time it was supposed to be paid, but I was still taken to court and evicted, basically illegally, with my rent fully paid. And now I am living in a car for 3 years, going on my fourth winter.
So, David, let me ask you this. Are you able to work at this point or no?
No, I'm pushing 60. My health is bad. I was in the hospital last night till 4 a.m. because I have heart problems. I'm on medical disability. I only get $700 a month. And I was literally hooked up last night. I still have them stupid things on my chest because I think they super glued them on there, and it's killing me to try and get them off.
Yeah, don't. They'll eventually fall off, okay? Trust me. You don't want to do that. So the only amount of money that you can get from the Commonwealth, you're an American citizen. Worked, I assume, at different points during your...
Yeah,
you talked over me. I wasn't able to hear what you said, Dave. I wasn't able to hear what you said, John. Go ahead.
I said, yes, I always worked. I had paper routes since I was 12. I worked from 16 in Faneuil Hall. I managed places. I owned my own places. I've always had 2 jobs and paid taxes, and that's all I get. And it's oddly enough, someone that I have friends, if you want to call them that, acquaintances, that never worked and get a psycho disability instead of a medical, and they're getting $1,400 a month. And they've never worked or paid taxes.
All right. First of all, my empathy and I just wish there was something I could do for you. But let me see what David has to say about this, because I'm sure you're not alone. You sound like a pretty intelligent guy. It would seem to me that it's an absolute tragedy that somehow you have slipped through these cracks and find yourself in the circumstances that you're in. David, comment on John's situation?
Well, my heart goes out to you. I'm really sad to hear that you're having to live on the streets. I can only imagine how scary that is, you know. A lot of homeless people have to protect themselves, and you've probably heard that they carry knives, and it's dangerous out there. So I'm sorry to hear about your situation. Other than trying to contact the city or the state for some kind of assistance, I really am not sure that I have any advice for you.
I believe me, I understand there's no advice. I've been to everybody. I've called everybody. I've tried to take the housing to court because I shouldn't have been evicted.
Okay, let me slow you down here. Let me slow you down for a second, John. This is Dan, okay?
Yeah.
You're calling from Melrose. Where are your roots? Are your roots in Melrose or in another community?
I grew up in Everett, which is now again taken over, but I've been all over. I lived in San Diego, and I've lived in Medford for 20 years.
But here's my question. And again, I can't take a lot of time, but just real quickly, in your travels, have you checked in with any of the churches or homeless shelters? I know it's not something that most people want to do, but there must be, again, you sound like a really rational guy. You don't have a drug problem. You're not going to cause a problem with people. Just to kind of get back on your feet a little bit, have you checked in with any churches in your community?
Of course.
And what are they telling you?
They're full. You can call a shelter tomorrow. People have asked me that, and I said, go ahead and find me one. And you can't. They're full. And,
well, let me do this, John. Here's what I'm going to do. I want you to leave your phone number with Rob, okay? And if there's anybody in the Melrose, Medford, Malden, Everett area who would be willing to be in touch with you, if you give us permission to give your number to whatever, either an agency or a church or a shelter, you should not be living in your car,
Yeah, I don't care what area it's in. I'm looking as far as Haverhill and stuff, but
okay, good.
I did want to make two quick points before we go. One is buildings, when they're putting up these condos, they need to provide lower income housing, for one.
Yeah.
And two, when you were saying it's dangerous out there, I've already had 3 broken ribs, pulmonary embolisms, punched in the face. They've already broken my mirror off the car. I've been beat. I fought 2-3 at a time, a punctured lung and a detached lung. So I've been through it all.
Okay. John, leave your number with Rob. And if there's anyone out there, we have full lines right now. If there's anyone out there who's heard your story and would like to either give you some help or guidance, we might be able to get you some help. But leave your number with Rob and leave your last name, assuming Johnny's your first name. And let's see if there's someone out there who might call us, and maybe we'll get you a little help tonight, okay?
Yeah. That sounds great. I don't think I'm going to make it another winter.
Oh, well, hopefully we'll get you inside before the winter comes, okay? I don't want to lose you as a caller or as a listener. Okay, hang on. Rob will take the information. These are tough calls that we've had over time here, and it is not uncommon to get that type of call, to be really honest with you, David, believe it or not. David, New Hampshire.
But it does paint the picture that we need to address, which is there are hundreds of thousands of homeless people in our country, and it's just not acceptable.
We just heard one right there. Let me go to David in New Hampshire. David in New Hampshire. I'm with David Rauch. Go right ahead, David.
Yeah, thank you so much for trying to help that gentleman. These problems, like California, Massachusetts, they have welfare states, and they can afford welfare states if they didn't have the dead weight of the federal government on top of that. With its new war every 4 years, a welfare warfare state doesn't work. You might be able to do a welfare state, but you can't do both.
Absolutely.
I think when California is making some moves toward independence, and when they become independent, I think that will help them. And I think when Massachusetts and New Hampshire become independent, that will help us.
Dave, we've talked about that before, and I know that you're involved in the group that wants to have New Hampshire secede from the Union. I don't think that's realistic, and I don't think it particularly pertains to tonight's topic. So we'll talk about the larger issues some other night if you would like, but if I mix it in here, it's only going to confuse the audience, okay?
It's the solution.
All right, thanks. Good luck. Okay, thank you. Let me go next to Gene in Everett. Gene, you're next on that side.
Hi, good evening, Dan. Thank you. This is a good subject. So the other man who called, who's living in his car,
yep, John.
I would suggest a couple of suggestions where he could make contact with some people that might be able to help. Is he should call or go to the last city or town he lived in where he got evicted from, and he can go into the city or town hall, or he can call either the mayor's office and ask for the housing department, which there are people there who do know about this type of thing.
Okay.
There are housing authorities in every city and town, and they can help people find a place. However, if they don't have it, they can refer them on. He needs to have someone who knows the ins and outs of all this to help him. He can't do it on his own.
Yep.
So that's one suggestion that he should.
No, we got that.
Also,
but talk to my guest. Talk to my guest if you would be so kind.
Okay. So what I'm calling about is I have a relative who lives in Boston. They've been there for multiple years. They lived in the same house. It was a triple family home. The landlord lived there, and my brother-in-law did some work around the house. He's handy, so he helped him out for years on multiple things. When the landlord moved out, my brother-in-law took care of certain things. Well, anyway, they were there for their lifetime, really. Now my brother-in-law is very sick, and my sister, and they're older. They're not young chicks, but whoever bought the house about a year and a half ago has gone way extremely up in their rent. They're almost $2,000 a month now, which they cannot afford. Yeah. She's retired, and he's...
All right, no, we got the picture, Gene. What's the question?
Well, here's the question. The question is, what are they supposed to do? They've been living there. They can't afford. My brother-in-law has cancer. Yeah. He's being treated.
In an owner-occupied three-decker in Massachusetts, the owner has, as long as it's owner-occupied, they have tremendous... ability to raise rent and
the owner doesn't live there. The owner sold it to another person who went way up on the rent.
Right. So the person who now owns it, Gene, do they live there or are they there?
The person who now owns it does not live there. Okay. However, has done multiple projects within the house without permit.
Yeah. Have them call. Have your brother-in-law and your sister, whatever. They've contacted the city of Boston. No one has gotten back to them. This has been months. Get a lawyer, because they should be able to have under Massachusetts housing law an opportunity to get a lawyer. Have them get a lawyer.
Yeah.
Gene, I hate to do this to you, but I got full lines packed.
It's just that there's no answer to help them. That's the unfortunate
There is an
thing.
answer if they get a lawyer. They should call the Mass Bar Association if they can't afford a lawyer. And try to get a reference to a lawyer. It's simple as that, Gene.
All right. Thank you, Dan. Have a good night.
You too. Thank you very much. We'll take a very quick break. My guest is David Rauch of Protect.com, and we're going to try to get everybody in here. Let me go next quickly, if I can, folks, to Kevin in Quincy. Kevin, you're next on Nightside.
Hey, Dan. How's it going tonight?
Going great. You're on with David Rauch. Go right ahead, Dave. Kevin.
Hey, Dave. How are you?
Good, Kevin. How are you doing?
Good. This one really piqued my interest. I listen to Dan's show a lot, and I know you being in the business probably for a long time. You've had your horror stories as far as being like, listening to landlords about what they have to deal with a lot of these. Let me just say, unfriendly landlord states like.
So what's your question? What's your question, Kevin? Kevin, I got packed lines here. What is your question or comment?
Well, I know, what's his idea of providing, affordable housing? I mean, it's almost like an unheard of thing. I mean, I've been in the business for 30 years, but I've been trying everything.
The only way to make housing more affordable for purchase or for rent is to build more of it. You've got to do something with the lack of supply of housing, and it's just we got to build more. But government is making it too difficult for builders to build. Again, in numerous states, it takes 3 months just to get a permit, and then you've got to hold that high land cost for 3 years. All that cost is passed on to that buyer or to that renter. So there's no other solution. You got to build more housing and rentals.
So do you think the federal government has to get more involved?
No, less involved.
Yeah. They got to get out of the way. They got to get out of the way, Kevin.
Yeah.
Well,
They're the problem. They're not the solution.
Well,
no, the federal government is the problem. Yeah, the only thing they used to do well was the military.
The high cost of building, that's the problem. These builders just can't.
The high cost of regulation. Building a house is not that expensive. You could do it for $100 a foot, $150 a foot in most states. But it's the regulations, the way, the permits, the taxes, the environmental regulations that just drive the cost of it through the roof. And the builder still is going to make a 5 to 15% net margin on what he's building. So he passes all those costs along to the buyer or the renter.
All right, Kevin, I got to go because I got more calls. I got to get to as many folks as I can. Appreciate your call tonight. As always, let's go to Steve in Cambridge. Steve, you're up. Go right ahead, Steve.
David, 2 quick questions. The government sometimes demands that apartment buildings have a certain number of what are called affordable units. I assume by making the rents low in those units, it makes the rents higher in other units. What effect does this have on the market?
It's terrible. It's one of the worst regulations that the government can do because it screws up the pro forma for the entire project. And essentially, why should the builder have to foot the cost for a certain number of people? This is what I'm talking about. This is one of the things that's holding builders back, is having to deal with, in California, what it's called inclusionary zoning, which is a crazy euphemism for you got to set aside 10% of all the units in your new community for affordable housing, people that, can't afford a house. Well, builders shouldn't be in the business of social engineering. They should just build, and that's one of the impediments to building.
I assume that makes the other houses cost more for the buyers, too. But I have one more question then.
Yeah.
And what about public housing? What effect does that have on the market when the government builds its housing and rents it and all that type of stuff? How does that affect the availability of housing for the rest of the population?
Well, that's a good effect. The more housing that's built, the lower the cost of purchasing and renting a home will be. And so any increase in the supply of housing is great, even if it's from the government. And one of the things that we've had a problem with in the last 5-10 years is we're not building enough condominiums because, again, condominiums have historically been a good gateway to homeownership for those that can't afford a single-family home. They buy a condo, they build equity, then they go on to buy a single-family home. So, again, all housing types are good.
Thank
Steve,
you very
appreciate
much,
it. I want to get
gentlemen.
one more in, okay?
Thank you.
Great questions, direct to the point. Maria in Plymouth. Maria, we got to be quick. Go right ahead. I'll get you in under the wire.
Hi, Dan. Good topic tonight. I just was wondering, why is it that it seems I live in Plymouth, and most of the housing that's being built down here, which is astronomical how much housing is being built, why is most of it like high-end properties? It's going to be so nobody is without loads of money is going to be able to live near the coast at all the way they're going.
Well, that's a market mechanism. There's a strong desire for people to live along the coast. That land is going to be much more expensive than the land that's inland, and for a developer to come along and build a community on that land, he's paying a lot more for the land right from the beginning, and there's a limited supply of land along the coasts. So that's going to be much more expensive, and that's just the market system at work.
Well,
Maria, thank you. I wish I had your call got in earlier, but I'm flat out of time. Thank you much. Thank you very much.
Have a good night.
You too. David Rauch, thank you. We have other callers, which if they want to hold on, we can. I'll take it on the other side of the 10 o'clock news. But David, thank you very much. We got to have you back. You were a great guest. It's a great topic.
Okay. Thanks for having me, Dan, and it is a very important topic.
Well, it sure is, and we will have you back. Thank you very much. I really enjoyed the hour. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.